Well, we are back. Welcome to IndyStar.com. I'm Stephen Holder here with Zach Keefer. Must be football season because we're back with another edition of Chopping Wood. You've asked for it. This is the critically acclaimed Chopping Wood podcast.
Not sure who the critics are.
I don't know who they are either, but
we'll take it.
It sounds good. So we're going with that. So yeah, we're back. It is basically opening week just about for the Colts in terms of training camp. As we sit here on a Tuesday afternoon, camp opens on Saturday, so there's going to be lots to talk about. There already is lots to talk about, and I've been off for a while. You've been off for a while, and frankly, we were talking about this earlier, Zach. I mean, I came back from vacation. It's like I couldn't even type. I forgot my password. I mean, it's just like a joke. But
it is funny how the entire NFL sort of community, media players, all take vacations at the same time. You know, Chris Ballard was a little bit on vacation recently, but as of Saturday, vacation's over and it's back to work every day until we find out how good this team is.
Yeah, it's already over, really, in fact, for the people making the decisions, and even the rookies have already reported. We'll get to that in a second because there's some news there. But let's sort of run down some of our topics for today. We got a lot to cover. Obviously, Andrew Luck, that has been the ongoing conversation this offseason, so we'll talk about his status. He's going to be on the physically unable to perform list, as you probably know. We'll talk a little bit about Chris Ballard himself, and Zach, you profiled him recently. Chuck Pagano, what's next for him? I'll tell you, that's still sort of an under-the-radar story in the NFL this year, I think. And then we'll touch on predictions. There was a quite interesting one this week that I think got people talking. So lots to get to, but let's dive right in, Zach, to the big topic, and that's Andrew Luck. So to set this up, as you probably know by now, Chris Ballard came out on Monday and I thought got ahead of this story, which I think was smart, and said that Andrew Luck's not quite there yet. That right shoulder still needs a little more time. He's going to be on the PUP list. Were you surprised by anything you learned yesterday? I personally was not. What are your thoughts?
No, I thought this was always in play. And Chris Ballard said that. And there's one thing that cannot be mentioned enough, I think, is that they have not gone out and signed a veteran quarterback. And there's some on the market. They have not done that. Now, they do have three, in addition to Luck, including Philip Walker, the rookie. They have Scott Tolzien, and they also have Stephen Morris. But from everything I've heard this summer from talking to people, I never heard the word setback. I did hear that it was moving along a little bit slower than they would have liked, but that's out of their control, right? But look, this is a 6 to 9 month recovery from everyone who knows about this operation. This is a throwing shoulder on the franchise quarterback. You do not rush this back. Chris Ballard and the Colts, to their credit, have not changed the story at all.
Yes.
So until they do, we have every reason to believe them. Look, he's 6.5 months into this recovery. He's throwing again. That's a huge step. But he's not ready to practice. That's not a surprise. And I think the date all along was never, July 29th. I think the date is September 10th. Did this surprise you yesterday?
No, I was not surprised. In fact, I will give the Colts some credit here because, look, they have never exactly been forthcoming about Andrew Luck's shoulder. Okay, it's 2 years of this now.
I mean, they broke the news by Jim Irsay going to Twitter and saying, "Oh, by the way, he had outpatient surgery, and we'll see you later in training camp."
Oh, what? You hadn't heard?
Oh,
and
okay.
So anyhow, for the past 2 years, really, this goes back to 2015. It's always been sort of like nothing to see here, right? And
we're just going to hold him out of practice one day a week the entire season,
right? So we went from that, which was, just really, really frustrating from our point of view, obviously trying to get information, trying to be accurate. That's just really difficult, to what we've now got, which is them actually, being somewhat forthright about this. And look, they haven't given us a lot of information, but they've been consistent, number one. And I don't get the sense they've lied to us about anything. I mean, I think Chris Ballard, for the time being, until we know differently, he has credibility here. And he has earned the benefit of the doubt, right? He hasn't seemingly misled us on this. So I'm going to give them some benefit of the doubt.
And they haven't boxed themselves into a corner and said he needs to be out there this day, or if he's not ready for the opener, that's fine.
Right.
That's not the end of the world. The Colts are proceeding with that, in mind, that the most important thing is that he gets that shoulder back to 100% whenever that happens. So stay tuned. It's going to be a little while.
You mentioned something that I think is worth hitting on again. Number one, they have not signed a backup quarterback. And Chris Ballard said they did have discussions about that. What I think is significant there is you could say, well, the fact that they were talking about it, maybe that raises an eyebrow.
Of course they talked about it. Of course they talked about it.
In your duty if
they talk about every position.
Right. But the fact that they decided ultimately that it wasn't necessary, I think that tells you, for a guy who only talks about competition, right? That's all he talks about, to the point where it's like annoying.
Greg Doyle column coming later this week for the IndyStar. He counts up how many times Chris Ballard has talked about competition, and that's a lot. So look forward to that later this week.
Wow, I didn't know that. Greg must have a lot of time on his hands. But the other thing for me that I would point out to people, in terms of perspective here, okay, keep this in mind. Look, this is about right now, certainly. Everyone wants to see Andrew Luck back in the lineup. But if you really look at this from sort of the bird's eye view, this surgery that he underwent was not necessarily about 2017.
He could have played, I believe, without the surgery. He did it all of last year and played pretty well.
I mean, I thought he was pretty damn good last year.
I thought he was a little bit behind his 2014 season, but man, we didn't notice. We didn't notice a bum shoulder. And
they could win a lot of games with that Andrew Luck if they fixed the rest of the roster, right?
Right.
So remember now, this was, as you just stated, basically an elective surgery. Now, I mean, he probably needed to do this, right? I think all the doctors agreed. I mean, he had to go through a lot to play last year, and that was hard, and you don't want your quarterback missing that much practice. So I don't have any issue with that. But my point is, the real reason they did this surgery was not so he would be able to play in 2017. It was so that he could not have issues in 18 and 19 and 20 and not continue to have to deal with this shoulder. So if you take that view, which the Colts are, then it doesn't necessarily matter what happens next week and the week after. They're looking at this from the long view, especially Chris Ballard.
And think about one of the first things Chris Ballard said when he took over. He realized the defense that he had, and he's made wholesale changes, and we'll talk about that, and we have in the past. He said it's going to take some time. It's not instant coffee. You're not going to get a quick fix. This defense might be okay this year, but it's going to take 2 to 3 years to get this defense to help the offense compete for possibly an AFC title and Super Bowl down the line. But you think about 2018, 2019, 2020, you want Andrew Luck completely healthy for that long-term view. And look, Chris Ballard's got 5-6 years. He's thinking about that as well. So the defense is not there just yet, but maybe the defense will be there by the time Andrew Luck gets back to 100%.
Right. So although we get preoccupied with the here and now, I think you have to also look at it from the team standpoint, and all that really matters is how Chris Ballard and the franchise
and I think
Jim Irsay.
This isn't even Chris Ballard's decision at this point. I think he's just waiting for the doctors to clear him, because at this point he is not going to hasten this at all. So once they get clearance, then they'll start talking about maybe taking him off the PUP list and letting him practice a little bit. But even then, I think it'll take some time. But a good point, we talked about this yesterday, and you asked Chris Ballard about this specifically, which I think is very fascinating, is let's say he comes off the PUP list a week before the season and they're going to LA on Sunday. What kind of Andrew Luck could we expect?
Big question.
With such minimal practice time. He is a veteran and he's done so much in this league already, but could he even be himself in that week 1 game? Probably not.
I wouldn't expect vintage Andrew Luck, no. And that's why I've said consistently, if you want to worry about something, worry about him starting slow, right? I mean, you raised the point about Peyton going through this.
Was not himself,
ago, right?
Yeah.
What year was that, 2007?
It was 2008, different injury. That was a burst or sack in the knee. This is a throwing shoulder, which is probably even more worrisome. But no, he wasn't himself, and anyone who watched those Colts teams then knew that. Now,
but he did round into shape,
and just happened to win the MVP that year.
That's right. So it just shows. I mean, I think every player who gets injured goes through this. I mean, if Andrew Luck was coming off an ACL, it would be the exact same conversation, right? Or let's use a different player. Let's say T.Y. Hilton would have torn his ACL last year, surgery, rehab, the whole nine. You ultimately expect, he's going to be there, and no one would bat an eye, right? We wouldn't be sitting here obsessing, well, is T.Y. Hilton going to ever play again? No, we'd say, well, it's going to take time, right? It's no different. I mean, it's just he's a quarterback. It's his shoulder. I get it. But if you really look at it from that standpoint and use sort of that example, I mean, what's the difference, right? In fact, it's less severe because he was playing with the injury. It's not like he had a season-ending injury. So to your point, he could have potentially played with this. So this is about long-term. They're not going to This is something Chris Ballard says all the time. We're not going to make short-term decisions that impact us in the long term. And that's the way to do things.
And nothing impacts him more in the long term than the health of number 12, and that's very obvious. So stay tuned on the Andrew Luck Watch. We will talk to Andrew later this week when the players report for training camp on Saturday. But obviously it's a huge step in the right direction that he is throwing the football again.
Yeah, and the other last thing on Luck I'll mention is another distinction I tried to make with Chris Ballard yesterday on Monday was at this point, the rehab and healing, is it over? Is this just about strengthening? And he was very clear that at this point he's just getting stronger, which makes sense, right? I mean, he's not out there, benching 400 pounds in the middle of a shoulder rehab, right? So this is about strengthening the shoulder itself. It hasn't gotten usage for quite some time. That's a process. I get it. So I totally understand. And if that's where he's at, that's probably where you expect him to be. So let's talk about Chris Ballard himself a little more. He has certainly been busy this offseason, okay? I don't know how many new players there are out of the 90 guys on the roster, but it's a lot. And this team is going to look quite different. The starting defense, we think 6 to 7 new starters potentially. So
that's on the low end. I mean, you assume Clayton Gathers isn't going to be there. I mean, he's not going to be there the first 6 weeks. We know that. But long term, is he the starter? That's TBD. But yeah, absolutely, he overhauled the entire defense. I mean, Vontae Davis and then a bunch of new guys.
Yeah. What do you think after spending some time with him this offseason, and what were your takeaways, and does it all starting to sort of make sense in terms of what he says and what he does? Is that all sort of meshing for you?
It is so far, and I had this conversation with Chris. We spent some time in June together, and I said, look, it's easy right now. You haven't had a draft pick go wrong. You haven't had a free agent go wrong. And he says, I know. He says, I know that's going to come. He says, nothing's going to change. Now, I said, it's easy to say that now. But he gives off this vibe that is very, very hard to look past. It's almost like, I've got this figured out. I've got this. This is how we're going to do it. We're going to do it exactly how I've always done it. It's always worked. And this is what's going to happen. It's not going to happen overnight, but it's going to happen eventually. And he speaks with a conviction that is very, very easy to read. And look, I mean, he's wearing sandals while he's telling me this, and I'm like, you make it look so easy. Is this for real? We'll see. I don't think the Colts are going to be that good this year. It's not going to be a 12-4 season, and he's going to be hailed as general manager of the year.
Right.
But he is taking that long-term view, and he has made moves that have made it very clear that the past era in which guys were, basically handed starting spots based on their contracts are not going to last. So you can see it in the moves he made. The one that jumps out right away to me is Dwayne Allen being traded, but he's obviously made competition his platform. That's what he's, that's what he's going to define his tenure on. Very interesting guy, a very smart guy with a very interesting story as well. I mean, this guy, 25 years ago was teaching American history in Texas with dreams of getting into football, not the NFL. That was too far to even dream about. But he has climbed his way up, and it's not an accident. There were no handouts. There was no connections to the NFL. This guy worked his way up, and he was so smart along the way that everyone just kept promoting him.
So the other thing I think that we need to touch on, and it's related to Ballard clearly, is Chuck Pagano and his future,
right?
Which is basically up in the air. I think for right now, he has somewhat of a clean slate. Somewhat.
It's hard to say that, but I agree because it's obviously they're all in on this season, and he's
got a new boss, right? So
right.
So this is it changes things, but I do think he also, on the other hand, has quite a big body of work, and there's good and bad in there, right? So it's not as if that's erased just because there's a general manager.
Lots of bad.
Right. So for Chris Ballard, one thing I will say is that he has never really, I think, gone on record or established, let's put it that way. He's never really established, what it's going to take, right, for Chuck Pagano to be retained. And I think that's smart, clearly. But I also would say that there really isn't a metric. There's not like a win number. There's not
that's not the way to do it.
No, it's really not. And I think it also reinforces that Chris Ballard is going to take an open mind to this. And is not going to sort of, stick to some, benign or I say not benign, I should say
Make the playoffs.
arbitrary.
Make the playoffs or don't make the
arbitrary
playoffs.
number.
It's not black and white. It's not
Right.
like that. It's very, very gray.
Right. Do you agree with that? And what do you think? How do you think he'll judge Chuck Pagano?
Here's what we know. We know that the minute Chris Ballard was hired, before he even told his wife that he had taken the job and that the family was moving to Indianapolis, he walked straight to Chuck Pagano's office and said, "We're going to do this together. We can't control the other things, but we're going to do this together." So, giving Chris Ballard the benefit of the doubt, he's all in on Chuck. He wants Chuck to succeed. There's no reason to think he doesn't. There's no reason to think he's rooting for Chuck to fail so he can hire his own guy.
Sure.
I think he really is buying in with Chuck. And look, you've seen it. I've seen it. Chuck has been in a better mood this spring than we've seen him in years past. We know why. Let's not dance around what everyone knows. And look, we've talked to people in the building, and Chris Ballard is, working with Chuck in a way that they didn't have before with Ryan Grigson. I asked Chuck about Chris Ballard back in June, and he said he's brought this building together. Where was this building before? Because it clearly was not together. So we asked Chris Ballard about Chuck yesterday, and he said, it's really, really been great working together. They really seem to be on the right, the same page, et cetera. Now, that's just what they're saying. And like I said, if they start 0-2, who knows what's going to happen. It's easy to say that now before we get to the real season. But it's going to be really interesting to see if Chuck Pagano can do enough to convince Chris Ballard that he is the guy. Now, remember, he's got 3 years left on his contract.
Sure.
So it's not like it's a decision needs to be made, next year when the season ends. Obviously,
Right.
They'll evaluate everything as they do every year, but it's not like his contract is up and they need to decide extension or see ya. So we'll see. But another year with Chuck Pagano on the hot seat. What would the season be without it?
Yep. And, for me, I've said this before, and I'm probably being redundant, but for me, it's just about what's the trajectory of the team. When we get done with the 2017 season, I think you'll know.
If you're Chris Ballard, what do you want to see?
Well, you want to see the arrow pointing in the right direction. You want to see,
especially on defense.
Yeah, you want to see players getting better. You want to see a team that feels as if it's taken a step, right?
It shows up ready to play. Because that's not always been the case.
Preparation, sure. Now, after the last 2 seasons, how have we felt about this team? They have been totally inconsistent.
They've been erratic.
Yeah, unpredictable.
I don't know who they are.
Inconsistent. Have not really made progress. They certainly haven't. They've regressed.
They've been the
right?
same team for 2 years.
Right.
They go out and they lose to the Texans with the AFC South title on the line, and they look flat. And then they go to Minnesota the next week and beat the crap out of the Vikings, which makes no sense at all. And that's
Right.
sort of the summation of 2 years of up and down football.
So I think it's going to be. I don't say an easy decision, but I think it will be clear, right? I think both Chris Ballard will know. I think we'll know. Okay, we'll be able to look at this team and say, all right, I think I know how Chris Ballard is going to assess this.
And it's a very rare situation that GM walks in and does not have a say over who the head coach is, at least to start. Usually that's, absolutely your right to decide who coaches the team. But we'll see how this year goes. I think you're right. I think we're going to know. I think after 2 years of up and down football and rumors and hot seat talk, I think this season, up or down, you're going to be able to tell if Chuck Pagano is the guy that will be coaching them for the future.
Yeah. Let's talk about some players. And, all right, Andrew Luck, we'll see what happens there. But who's the guy for whom you have the highest expectations outside of the quarterback on this team? Like, who's the guy who needs to just be the man for this team, in your view?
Jonathan Hankins comes to mind. And it's not the money, but I'm anxious to see a big-bodied defensive tackle do something. Change the game, own the line of scrimmage. They haven't had that in so long. And you talk to all the linebackers, and they say, "Look, it changes everything for us."
I like this call, actually. Yeah.
They've had to lean on the linebackers so much in years past, and you remember talking to Jarrell Freeman and DeQuell Jackson about that. They've been throwing a guy at nose tackle just because he was there, and very average play at that position. And look, if Hankins is healthy, that could change everything for the defense. So that's the guy. I mean, he's talked a big game. He's talked a really big game, and I'm really anxious to see. And look, returns are really good on him. I mean, Henry Anderson, who's a really good interview and very honest, he said, look, I thought he was good because he signed for a big contract. He's really good. So I'm anxious to see him both in training camp and then when the games really matter.
Yeah, the first impressions on Hankins were really strong. And, it would be easy on this topic to say a guy like, T.Y. Hilton, right? But I think
you know what you're going to get.
Right. We know what he is, right? I want to
productive.
see who's the guy who's going to take a step and really impact this team, make a difference with this team. T.Y. Hilton has already made a difference.
Right.
So I think, a guy that comes to mind for me could be Dante Moncrief, for example.
Right.
Like, is he going to take that next step? And maybe that's maybe that was the better way of phrasing the question. Like, who's the guy who needs to excel and hit the next level? Certainly,
I think
Jonathan
he's
Hankins.
right there, ready to do it.
I think he is close. And for me, in looking at Dante Moncrief, it's not a matter of like, can he do it? It's like, just will you do it,
He
man?
can do it.
Are you going to do it?
His receivers coach, the new receivers coach for the Colts, said he could be a Pro Bowler.
I don't disagree with
He's
that.
got a long way to go to do that. It's
does.
really hard to be a Pro Bowler.
But the reason I agree with that assessment, though, is because physically he's got it.
Right.
We know he's got ability. And what he lacks is consistency.
Right.
And
it takes time. It took time for
It does.
T.Y.
It does.
And he really put it together the last season.
Yeah.
Moncrief, consistency is the next step.
The best receivers in the league are the guys who do it for 4 quarters in 16 games, right?
Right.
I mean,
Right.
look, I would say Antonio Brown, okay? You know what you're going to get, and you know he's going to be a problem all day long, right? And he doesn't have games where he just sort of gets lost in the shuffle, or he gets doubled and just
yards and that's it. Yeah.
No, he doesn't have those kinds of days. And Dante Moncrief has been a little bit prone to some of that.
His stats are almost misleading because he's a touchdown machine. You can't take that away from him. Andrew Luck loves going to him in the end zone, and that's huge, right?
Sure.
Those are points. But the production in the middle of the field is lacking. I think he knows that. And the big cloud hovering over this is a contract year for Dante Moncrief. And under this new regime, they didn't draft Dante Moncrief. Obviously, he's an up-and-coming player, but there's no guarantee that he's back. I mean, obviously, you would think he would be. He's a productive player. He's a young guy. He's a good locker room guy. But look, we don't know anything.
Yeah.
This business can change really fast. Look at Dwayne Allen. We expected him to be back, and he's playing for Bill Belichick this season.
Amazing. The other thing with Moncrief, I don't believe there's been anything happening there in terms of contract talk.
Last we talked to him, there was not.
Right. And along those same lines, there's another big name player in a contract here. That's Jack Mewhort. And just to throw this out there, a little nugget, I was told as of a few days ago, there's nothing happening there. So they're kind of letting these things play out unless something changes in the next couple of weeks, which I don't anticipate because I don't think they'll negotiate during the season. So unless something changes, both those guys are going to go into the season in their final years and have to deal with their contracts after the season.
2 players that Colts would love to bring back and 2 young guys that have proven their worth so far. But there's still a little bit to prove. And Jack Mewhort's coming off that injury.
Sure.
That scary knee injury he had, I think, in the Texans game on that Frank Gore screen pass that turned into a touchdown. But, 2 guys from that 2014 draft that all of a sudden are up for contracts after the year.
Yeah. A draft where Grigson actually hit a couple guys, actually.
Yeah, because the year before, none of them are still on the team.
Oh, you mean that 2013 draft?
Yeah.
That amazing 2013 draft? The Bjorn Werner headlined draft?
Right.
Not a fan? Nah. Anyhow, speaking of not being a fan, how about let's talk predictions. Now, these predictions aren't worth the paper they're written on, right? We know that, so we're not going to make too much of it. But, just for fun's sake, our brethren, Gannett Brethren, St. Ownership, at USA Today, they put out their predictions for the season, and they had the Colts at a sparkling 5-11 in 2017. I was startled by that because I don't know how you arrive at that, right? I think they're a better football team this year. Maybe not dramatically better, but I certainly don't see them being 3 games worse than 2016. So, but what I think it did do was raise the point that people just don't have a lot of respect for this team right now. And I'm not feeling sorry for them. I mean, they've earned that. But it is interesting. The perception of this team right now is one of not really a whole lot of respect for this team.
You look at the defense, and it's hard to argue with them.
Yeah.
I mean, the defense is a giant question mark at this point. But I will say this. If Andrew Luck comes back, and if Andrew Luck is healthy, they're not winning 5 games. He is too good of a quarterback to allow that to happen. If you put him on a football team, It's just not going to happen.
I mean, Andrew Luck has, for all intents and purposes, won you 8 games. Well, he definitely last year won you 8 games, basically.
Right.
I mean, it certainly didn't come from the defense.
And they were,
okay.
I mean, I get it. They were schizophrenic and they couldn't put it together, but they were middle of the pack. I mean, they went to Green Bay and they won. They went to Minnesota and they won. And I'm not excusing the bad losses in the AFC South, but they're not winning 5 games if Andrew Luck's quarterback.
I still will contend that if the Colts could tackle like anybody, okay, they'd have won 10 games last year.
What are you talking about?
Like Lamar Miller, cough.
Yeah,
I mean,
9 missed tackles. The play that would live in infamy.
I mean, it's hard to do that.
That was the season.
It's hard to do.
That was the season. We didn't even know it that night, but that was their season, and they lost it.
But you could also go back though and find other instances in the Jacksonville game in London.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I thought it might have been Alan Hearns. Was it Alan Hearns? I can't recall.
Alan Robinson. Excuse me. And what I recall in that game was He's still burning Antonio Cromartie.
there were a couple of instances in that game where, I mean, they just had an utter inability to tackle. And at the end of the day, those kinds of plays come back to haunt you. Right. I mean, look, if your offense gives you 27 points, you got to win.
Yeah.
You got to win.
Yeah.
You got to find a way.
And on that note, we talked about Chris Ballard earlier, but this is something he said that jumped out at me yesterday. It's going to be a more physical camp. Now, we hear this every year. But he actually did back it up by saying we're going to have more live sessions. And the Colts have been very, very conservative in years past. I think that's a Chuck Pagano thing.
It is.
And I get it. Look, Chuck Pagano wants to win games, and if he's going to win games, he's going to have his star players on the field. You don't want them getting hurt, and they were older in the last couple of years. And this is another thing that plays into that. Guys like Robert Mathis, Mike Adams, DeQuell Jackson, Eric Walden, those are guys that would get days off every third day, all season long. Nobody's getting days off this year.
Yeah,
maybe Adam Vinatieri, end of list.
I think that sets a tone when those guys aren't out there every day. Now, I'm not disagreeing with it. I mean, Robert Mathis can't.
He earned his days
every single
off.
day, right?
Absolutely.
At 35 years old. I get that.
This is something the coaches have mentioned, and that's going to help them, one, with that competition that Ballard wants so badly, but two, we don't know who the starters are right now. I mean, there's a lot of jobs up for line, and Chris Ballard really likes that. So maybe a more padded physical practice, one, will help them find out who the better players are. That way the Colts don't get, changing the lineup in week 3 like they had the last couple of years. And two, make some tackles when the game's on the line.
Yeah. Now, I'll expand on this a little bit. I think there's an interesting point to be made here. When Chris Ballard talked about the fact that there will be more contact this year, what he said in addition to that was that he and Chuck Pagano have talked about this a lot and at great length. Now, I think we know that Chuck Pagano and Ryan Grigson disagreed on that because Ryan Grigson, I think, wanted to be more aggressive and wanted to be more physical. It's just sort of his nature. Now, he didn't win that battle. Interestingly, Chuck Pagano seems to be heeding the advice here. Now, I don't know. What does that mean? I don't know. But what I will say is that...
I keep my job, maybe?
Yeah, that's a factor. But I'd also say is it shows that they have the ability to have constructive conversations, these two guys.
And that's not the only topic they've had. We've heard about discussions they've had on these things.
Yeah, whereas with Ryan Grigson and Chuck Pagano, that was not the case, as we well know and have well documented, right? So maybe that's an indicator of something positive. I mean, at the end of the day, Chuck's got to win, bottom line. But I do think that's a little microcosm there. You look for those little things. We always look for those little signs of indicators of what might be going on that's not obvious. And maybe that's one. But I will say this: you're right. Chuck Pagano has been extremely conservative, both in games, about practice, all these kinds of things. It's just his nature. This is a departure from that. And it seems like it's decided. Like, this is not talk. It sounds very much as though this is decided. So
Ballard does not type talk in hypotheticals.
No, he's just not throwing out words.
Right. Yeah. Right. He's very, very determined and resolute in what he wants and what he decides, and that's what they're going to do. So it'll be interesting as we talk more with Chris Ballard as the season progresses. The subtle changes that he's made and how this organization is run. For example, we're at home for training camp this year, and secondly, how that relationship with Chuck Pagano evolves. Yeah.
Now, we talked about certainly all the changes that have been made on the roster. Generally, they've been on defense for the most part, and we talked earlier, or you mentioned earlier about the defense, and you said maybe it's average this year. But frankly, that's really where the bar is it not? I mean, how much better can it be? I mean, I think I'll say this before you go on. I have kind of been proceeding with the assumption that it's going to be better. But at the same time, they're also asking a lot because they're putting an entirely new group together, and that does take time, and that's
Right.
a big challenge.
That's
so
a lot on Ted Macchino's shoulders.
it is. He has perhaps more talent, but it's putting that all together takes some work. So, do you think that's going to be a process, and can he make that can he accelerate that process this year?
Well, it certainly doesn't hurt that the first team you play is the worst ranked offense from 2016. So, hello, Jared Goff, right? I think the defense will struggle early on, and I think they will get better, and I think they will be better than 2016. Not only because the 2016 defense was the worst technically we saw in the Indianapolis era, but there's a couple of things I really focus on with defense. The line of scrimmage, it's very simple, right? They lost the line of scrimmage for 15 years. And then this is so obvious, but you got to get to the quarterback, and Robert Mathis didn't get to the quarterback in 2016, and Trent Cole didn't get to the quarterback in 2016, and Eric Walden did, but they didn't get to the quarterback enough, and that's everything in this league, right?
Yeah.
If you do not get to the quarterback and disrupt the pocket, you're just not going to win that many games. It's that simple. Look at the way the Super Bowl changed. It was on that Dante Hightower sack,
Yeah.
and that's literally how the Patriots turned the entire momentum of that game. So it's going to come down to guys like Jabal Sheard and John Simon on the edge, and they're going to be a step up. I really believe they are. Early returns are good. Chuck Pagano's talked very highly of John Simon, and Sheard comes from New England. It's going to be, like you said, meshing all that talent together is going to be huge. It's going to be a huge challenge. But are they better in those two areas that I think really sort of killed them in the last couple of years? On the line, they added Jonathan Hankins, Kendall Langford's coming back, Henry Anderson's coming back at 100%. And on the edges, I think they're better. So I think they are a better defense. And look, this is what Chris Ballard said. This is not something we're just peddling. He said, we just need to get back to average on defense to give our offense.
And I so appreciate that.
I mean, that's the bottom line here, right?
Like, don't sell me a bunch of BS, right?
Like we watched,
honest,
and this is what he said. He said, "You guys watched the tape. We did watch the tape,
yeah,
and we did watch all the games.
Thank you for noticing
and
that.
if you were average on defense, you probably win 11 games last year.
That's right, because you find a way to win the Texans game on the road. You find a way to win against Jacksonville and London, most likely.
Detroit in week 1.
I mean, exactly. Just tackle someone. That was the other game I was thinking about, the Detroit game, when I talked about the difference tackling would have made last year. The other thing I would point out on defense is they'll be younger, and now while that's a detriment, obviously, in an obvious way, it also is a plus because those guys could just make plays just based on youth that some of the older guys could not make, even though they certainly were more savvy and smarter and understood the game and the system. There were times they just couldn't get to the ball, right? So there's going to be a difference when...
Let me ask you about this, though.
Sure.
What about the secondary? That is a huge question mark right now. We have new news today, and we've talked about the front seven, and we've talked about the linebackers and the line and all that, but the secondary is...
Yeah, it's...
I don't know.
There are
they're
issues
young, they're
there.
different, they're not complete, they're not healthy by any means.
Look, so the problem in the secondary is they're really unproven. And well, the big thing, there's a couple things. let's start slow here. Clayton Gathers is going to be out a while. Okay,
Yeah.
He's going to be on the regular season PUP, which is, I guess, the reserve PUP list, which means this is not like Andrew Luck and Malik Hooker, who we'll get to in a second, but he is going to be on PUP during the regular season, so he's going to miss a minimum of 6 weeks at least. Could be more. Now they have the freedom to bring him back after that, but he's going to require that at least that much time to heal.
Chris Ballard did say yesterday that they will ramp up his, September and October's workouts.
Right.
But do you remember when Clayton Gathers finally talked to the media? It was in May. They had been trying to hide the fact that he had surgery in March for 3 months, and I said, will you be out there when the season starts? And he paused for 3 or 4 seconds and then said, yeah, I think I'll be out there. And it was the most unconvincing answer I've ever heard. This is a neck injury, and that makes you worry. I was asked the question yesterday on the radio: will we ever see Clayton Gathers play football for the Colts again? I think we will, but this is a very serious injury, and we're not going to see him for some time. It's going to be deep into the fall when we see him put on a jersey and play a game.
Right, and then at the same position, the guy he was supposed to line up with, Malik Hooker, we learned today, he had a little bit of a hamstring strain in the conditioning test the rookies have already reported. So they were doing their conditioning test after Chris Ballard spoke to us and told us that Malik Hooker was okay to go after that hernia surgery in the offseason.
Hip surgery,
excuse me, abductor or something like that, whatever. The point is, he overcame that, and then here he goes out on Monday afternoon and strains the hamstring. Now, he's going to be on the preseason active PUP list, which just means that once he's better, he can be activated at any time. But it does give you the flexibility to put a guy on the regular season PUP if you need it. So it only makes sense if a guy is hurt and you don't know how long it's going to take. Yeah, you should do that. But it certainly is not a good development, even though this may be somewhat minor. This is a big deal because this kid missed the entire offseason. So he's got a lot of ground to make up. He plays a position where they need help, and he's the first-round pick, and he's got a skill set that not a lot of their guys have.
And he hasn't played a lot of football.
Correct.
I mean, this guy started 12 games at Ohio State, period.
Yeah.
And he was a stud. I mean, 7 interceptions, and Chris Ballard raved about his big playability. But he needs to play football. He needs to get reps. He needs to see offenses and see the calls and all that stuff. And he didn't do any of that in the offseason, not in the mini camp, not in the rookie mini camp. So training camp was huge for him to just get out there and get as many reps, because this is a guy they're obviously hoping will start in week 1.
Yeah.
Now that's obviously still on the table. We've got such a long way to go. This is just a minor hamstring tweak, but this is not news you want to hear, because right now your starting safeties are Matthias Farley and Darius Butler, and TJ Green's probably in the mix as well, and we'll see more of camp. But safety position is really hurting right now because of the injuries.
Yeah, I think at this point with Malik Hooker, I'm really taking a sort of wait and see approach there. I was a little more bullish about him before this, and I don't want to make too much of this. I really don't. I think he's probably going to be fine. But the issue for me, I think you make a great point. Like, he hasn't played a lot of football. This guy was a one-year starter in college, a phenomenal starter, an All-American, but a one-year starter all the same. And you're talking about now making a huge leap. And he's got deficiencies in his game as it is, because he's not a good tackler, so he's going to have to work on that. So he's got a lot to overcome, and he's going to have a shortened period of time to do it. So to expect him to assume, I should say, that he's going to be in the starting lineup on day 1, that is probably a little ambitious right now. It could happen, but I can't assume that right now. I think you're going to have to see more, and that's going to be hard. I mean, they're now going to have to potentially alter their expectations of Malik Hooker in year 1. Ultimately, long-term, I think he'll be fine. But year 1, we'll see. That's my approach right now.
Another guy right there with him, although he's healthy, is Quincy Wilson. Mm-hmm. I mean, another guy they hope and really, really, really hope is in the starting lineup in week 1, opposite Vontae Davis at that cornerback spot. But, look, we got a long way to go. We got 6 weeks of both training camp and preseason practices. We got 4 preseason games, and that's a really, really tough spot to jump into. So they have high hopes for him, but there is some competition at cornerback as well, which will be interesting to see in camp.
But to your point, the secondary is it's an area that they've got some work to do. Now, they certainly aren't world beaters at inside linebacker either, but we knew that. So I don't think we need to obsess over that. It is what it is. But the secondary, we thought, had a chance to be good, and they just right now have a lot of instability there with the injuries. So
they're going to lean on Vontae Davis, and what else is new?
Again.
I mean, he's a man on an island back there.
Hopefully the guy gets some pass rush this year, because he could sure use it.
Yeah.
So, anyhow, I hesitate to do this, but, people love to know what we think. I don't know why, because I don't know a damn thing half the time. But, we do this for a living, so we spend a lot of time thinking about the Colts. As we sit here today, this has been an 8-8 football team the last 2 years. Is this going to be a better football team this year? What are your thoughts? How much better can this football team be?
Yes, with the caveat, everything depends on how they start the season. And I know that's obvious, right? I'm not breaking any news here, but they have a very, very conducive start, right?
Yeah.
They have winnable games out there, and I don't care any NFL cliche, any team can lose any game. We've seen that. We know this team can lose anybody. But they have a really winnable. They have a 4-1 start right there for the taking. And it's a matter of whether they go out and do it. I realize going to Seattle is very tough, and LA's defense is really good. But go out and win the games. They haven't done that in years past. They've had to scrape and claw just to get to 1-2 after dropping the first 2 games like the last 3 years. So a good start would do very, very good things for Chuck Pagano. I still think they will be a better team. I think the defense will get better as the season goes on. I think Andrew Luck will get better as the season goes on, obviously, as well. And Chris Ballard has talked about this a lot of times. He kind of drops this into his interviews. It's about November and December. And yeah, that's obvious football talk, right? But that's why they're going to be so physical in camp, because that's when it lasts for November and December. And you look at the Chiefs and the way they've won the last couple of years, there's going to be a lot of parallels with that. The one difference between Andrew Luck and Alex Smith, there's a huge difference there. So we'll see. But it'll be a really interesting camp to see how it plays out. I know you're sort of on board. There's going to be a lot of position battles that we don't know how they're going to shake out. So that'll be sort of a new change for us.
Yeah. I feel kind of like you feel, which is I think they'll be a little bit better. I think they can win 10 games. But I also will admit the division is better. Certainly J.J. Watt's back, for example, in Houston. Now, they don't have a quarterback, but what else
you're
is
very hesitant to crown a team without a quarterback.
Sure.
But hey, and I think we're both in agreement on this, Tennessee is really good.
Well, I was going to get to them. Tennessee is the team that I think
they're the most complete team at this moment, maybe?
Yeah, I think in the long term, Tennessee is the team that I'd worry most about.
But are they 12-4 good this year?
No.
Like USA Today said, I don't know about that.
Not buying that. Let's start with this. How about beat the Colts and we'll talk?
Okay? They haven't beat the Colts since Curtis Painter was the quarterback.
Right. So let's keep that in perspective.
That'll be a fun Monday night game, though, this year, and I think in October down in Nashville.
Two good games last year. They played 2 good games. So,
right.
But anyhow, I just feel like there's a lot of ifs, and there always are this time of year, because what the heck do we know? But if Andrew Luck ultimately is healthy, that's huge, right? He had a great year last year. I think he'll be fine. If the defense is better, obviously, that's a big plus. If some of these young guys can come along, if the offensive line is what we think it is, that's a plus.
Fixed, according to Jim Irsay. Not sure about that, though.
We'll see. But they have a shot, right? And so there's all these little, I guess, anecdotal reasons to think they have a shot to be a decent football team. But look, we thought that before. We've thought that the last couple of years. They've got to put it on the field.
We didn't know how old the defense was last year until the season.
They overestimated the defense. They never said it was good.
Yeah, but
they didn't know it was 30th.
They were placing their entire hopes on guys that were 35 and
which is
fool's gold in their face. Yeah.
But anyhow, I do feel like I'll reinforce what you said about the fast start. Look. The mental burden of trying to dig out of an 0-2 hole is tremendous, and this team has not coped well with that. They have done okay just to get out of that and get back to 500 the last couple of years, and I don't know how they did it in 2014, getting to
well, the
wins.
NFC South was an easy 6 wins back then.
That's true. That is,
and they played good football that year.
They did.
And they beat.
They played
Baltimore
better defense.
Cincinnati,
and people recall too.
Yeah.
But one thing I'd say is, now, if you put yourself in a favorable spot and now you're 4-2 to start or something, that changes everything from a mental standpoint.
Absolutely.
It takes the heat off. You can take more chances. You can be more aggressive. And I think when you're in a hole, it changes how you approach the game. It changes just the decisions that you make. I think it changes everything.
You start changing the lineup. You start thinking differently. You get away from the process, as Chuck Pagano. You don't stick to the process. And even though he wants to say that all he wants, they have not stuck to the process, and they've panicked a couple of times in the last couple of years.
Yeah, so for me, that's huge. And I think that's why getting Andrew Luck in the lineup for that L.A. game, they know it's huge. And that's a game they got to have. And they don't want to leave that to Scott Tolzien, because who would? So, anyhow, it's going to be interesting. I tell you, I think this is a team that for you and I, we've talked about this, we don't know what we're going to see, and we don't know how this is going to shake out. And, look, at the end of the day, for us, this is work, and I don't want to, I'm not complaining. I'm just saying, it is work. But I do think there's some intrigue this year for us, and so I know you feel the same way out there. So We're going to wrap this up. We're going to be back. I guess we'll do this on a regular basis now. So no more vacation. I'm done with the beach, and you're done with your triathlons and 5Ks and whatever the heck it is you do. Not done with golf. Zach is never done with golf.
Nah. Gotta keep chopping wood on the golfing course.
That's right. So anyhow, stay tuned. We'll be back. Lots of stuff coming. Got some players to watch, some stories coming out there, Chester Rogers and others who I think are worth watching this year, and lots of really good content to come. Players Report Saturday. Stay tuned. Lots of coverage on IndyStar.com and elsewhere ahead for the Colts. I'm Stephen Holder with Zach Keefer. Thanks for listening.